It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
Excellent. And today we are talking about Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon.
Yes, this one was a listener request.
It was, and thank you for requesting because I actually had a real good time with this one, which I was not at all expecting. Would you like to do the plot, or shall I?
Sure, I can do the plot. So, 1,000 years ago, or just short of 1,000 years ago, the Nameless One, an evil being of fire and that's also a dragon, was imprisoned beneath the earth. And now the East, which still has air and water elemental dragons, and is basically Asia, and is out of contact with the West, which hates all things draconic. Even the ones that are nice, benevolent air and water dragons. And in this, we have Eid from the south, who is part of a secret magical priest and mostly nunnery called the Priory of the Orange Tree. And she has been sent to guard the queen, who may be the key to keeping the Nameless One imprisoned. Meanwhile, over in Asia, there's a dragon rider, or girl who wants to be a dragon rider. And there's also an elderly gay fugitive alchemist, hanging out in Asia. And eventually, all their lives will come to intertwine as the Nameless One returns.
Yes. You didn't quite get all of the viewpoint characters there.
I forgot Loth because he's boring. Sorry, Loth.
Oh, yeah. In addition to the assassin / mage nun and dragon killer and the dragon rider and the Queen of England, there is and the drunk alchemist who is our wizard, incidentally.
Is he? Okay, this will be an interesting
we'll talk about that. There is also Loth, who is the most goodest little boy that there has ever been. He's a good Christian boy.
He is our token decent cis man of this book.
This book has like a couple of real contenders for the next Weasley Awards, both in the token good guy category, although it really isn't token in this book, and in the bad mom category. I think that it's going to sweep it. At least that's what I thought before I read The Thousand Eyes. That's a little teaser for you.
There's some bad moms in here, yeah. Yeah.
This entire problem is, I think, based upon the actions of a bad mom. But again, we'll get into it. Yep. I would say, like, the only thing that you need to know about this book is that if there isn't, I was reading the audiobook, but if there isn't a map in the frontispiece, I'll eat my hat.
I believe there might be. I don't remember if there's a map or not. I have the ebook, which makes it harder to remember these things.
Yeah, no. Even if there isn't, there is one in spirit. This is what Leora would refer to as a cat squasher.
That's not Leora's term. That's Reddit's term.
Okay.
Leora just passed it along to me.
Or a doorstop, or whatever you want.
Or a big old-fashioned 90s brick.
Yeah. I hadn't realized that I missed it until I got my teeth into this one. And as far as why you should read the book goes, basically, if you miss the experience, if you miss the experience of reading like a big old 90s brick with a couple different points of view and a big sprawling adventure, but you just want it to be a lot gayer and like less weirdly sexist or objectivist. Yeah. Less gay. I mean, gayer and more multicultural.
Incidentally, yes. There are, in fact, 2 maps at the front of the book.
Yes, I'm unshocked by this revelation.
2 maps plus like some dragon art.
So I mean it pretty much is what it says in the tin. It's actually better written than a lot of those 90s bricks were.
This feels like somebody read those and went, I want to do that, but has like 20 to 30 years of additional development in the writing field, and is able to sort of learn from many of the mistakes of the previous ones, including this is just a book. This is not
Yes.
going to be a...
This is not the wheel of fucking time here.
Right. The
Yeah.
author has completed it while she's still alive.
Yep.
Everything wraps up in like 800 pages, which actually makes it on the short side for, compared to like a Wheel of Time book. But
And unlike my touchstone for this, who is, as you know, Tad Williams,
another classic of the genre.
this author knows how to pace. This book
Yes.
moves along at a good clip, which is
Yes, it
very
does.
important if you're going to write an 800-page book.
Yes. Now, one thing this book is missing from the classic 90s brick stuff is that it's just, the sexuality here is sort of very open and healthy by and large. There's not, like, all those 90s bricks had it, you could tell that the author had, like, their one weird kink.
Oh, I mean, or in
Or
the case of
six
Tad
weird
Williams,
kinks.
multiple weird kinks, yes.
Right. But, like, it was really it's sort of a journey through, these white men's kinks. And this is not that.
Yeah, no, none of the sex in this book is particularly sexy. The sort of I mean, this is sort of an issue that we've run into multiple times, is that we are sacrificing, when we look at the retro books, we're often sacrificing, competence for interest. And that would sort of be my major why you shouldn't read this book, is that it is kind of bland, particularly in the first half.
Yes. It's a little bland, and I mean, the pacing is better than Tad Williams, but it's still, it could have started further in and cut a lot of stuff out.
Yes.
I think this could have been I think that this could have been cut down to 500 pages and been a perfectly readable book.
I agree. I think that particularly that it didn't need as much setup as it
Right.
got. But I was like 400 pages into it, and they still hadn't gotten to the cosmology yet, which to me was the most interesting thing that the book had to offer, like apart from, just basic entertainment. So we could have gotten there a little bit faster. I think I might have just bogged down and stopped reading it, had I not been doing it for this podcast.
No, I'm tempted to push back against your contention that something has to be the author's weird sublimated kinks to be interesting.
Oh, it doesn't have to be. It's
or sexy for that matter. But
it's just that in this case,
the book is a little bland.
yes.
It's fun. Like, it is totally fun. And, I forgot like 2/3 of it after I read it the first time. So I, cheerfully reread it the second time. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened. But it's,
I should also point, I mean, to
fine.
your point, pursuant to your point, also, there's nothing that guarantees that a white fantasy author's kinks are at all interesting. I think the Tad Williams kinks were interesting. I don't think that, like, the George R. R. Martin rape fest, is interesting.
See, I was mostly thinking of Terry Goodkind with his, like, with his I really want Ayn Rand to beat me kink.
Yeah, I mean, she's not a white dude, but I think C.J. Cherry's kinks are interesting.
Cherry's kinks are fascinating.
Yes.
Whatever's going on with like Cherry's approach to gender, we got to do a special episode or two on Cherry.
Yes.
But no, it's just that I mean,
Octavia
the thing is
Butler's kinks are. I'm sorry. Yes. Go
right.
ahead.
No, see, that's the thing, right? Is that often there's plenty of times when authorial kinks are interesting. It's often not the big 90s bricks. I mean, I guess some Tad will. I don't know. I don't like Tad Williams as much as you did, but I just the amount you can. They're not. I'm just not sure that actually, whatever is the psychosexual dynamics of the Wheel of Time, or A Song of Ice and Fire, or The Sword of Truth. I mean, The Sword of Truth is sort of entertainingly bonkers, but I'm just not sure that you call any of these interesting. But they do all have a certain bonkers quality to them from an era when more people bought books, so it was less risky. You could do a weirdo book, and like these days, bestsellers with a few exceptions. Like these days, a successful book is selling significantly less than a mid-list book might have in the past.
Agreed. But I think that we are probably
We,
digressing a bit much for
right.
this phase
The
of the
point
podcast.
is, the point is, this book has had a lot of the weird edges sanded off, and
Agreed.
in some good ways and in many boring ways.
Agreed. Content, and as a result, content warnings are not as thick on the ground as they might have been for some of those old books. We have mutilation, execution, torture, and off-screen incest. No rape, I don't believe. And the torture's all off-screen too, if I recall correctly. It's mostly threat of torture that.
The incest is certainly of dubious consent, but there's no on-screen rape.
Yeah.
And yeah. Oh, and disease. There's. It was real interesting. The first time I read this, COVID was not a thing. It was real interesting reading this a second time with the plague.
Yeah. It definitely it hits different, as the kids say. But yeah, I would say that this is all par for the course for this sort of high fantasy, politics and war tome, and is like less grueling than many in that respect, I would say. But I skipped right into that over. Are there wizards? Are there lesbians? There are definitely lesbians. 100% lesbians. The wizards.
I'm not sure if there's wizards. I'm not
Right.
actually. There's a variety of reasons why. Even though I think I'm glad we're covering it for the podcast, I'm not actually sure that this is a wizards versus lesbians book, and not just because of the lack of a wizard.
Neither am I. I think that there are a number of important ways in which this differs from the Wizards versus Lesbians books that we've already discussed, not only in its format but in its ideology. And I think that when I was like 2/3 of the way through the book, I was like, I'm going to make the point that this isn't actually a Wizards versus Lesbians book. And then, sort of with the full plot arc of Nicolaes Roos, who is the alchemist, I thought it's not central, but it's addressing the Wizards versus Lesbians thing in this book.
A little bit. Some of it.
A little bit. It's not the point of the book in the way that it is for many of the other books.
And the thing is that Roos, while he's certainly a conflicted figure and a complex character, he's not involved really much. I mean, the time when there is a sort of wizard lesbian relationship is all in the backstory of the book.
Yes. I think that this is very much down to the way this book deals with gender, and I'm very interested in getting into that. But we should get into that post-spoiler zone.
Yes.
So, is there anything else that we need to discuss before we go there?
No, I think people now have a pretty good idea of why they should or shouldn't read it.
Yep. All right, into the spoiler zone we go.
Into the spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone. So yeah, I want, before we begin, to do a quick shout out to the performer of the audiobook that I read, because it was incredibly helpful to me that she pulled out a wide variety of accents completely out of a bag, essentially, to help me keep all of these various nationalities and characters straight. Without that, I would probably have been lost. So thank you for randomly assigning weird accents to these various fantasy nations. I appreciate it. But yeah, no, let's talk about this book in gender. So the reason that I think that this isn't a Wizards versus Lesbians book, and you also think this isn't a Wizards versus Lesbians book, is that the Wizards versus Lesbians books tend to locate the sin of the world in patriarchy, if you see what I mean. And this book does not.
I don't know if I do not know if your classic Wizards versus Lesbians book necessarily locates the sin of the world in patriarchy. I think that they tend to locate the sin of the world in colonialism, and patriarchy is a tool of upholding colonialism.
Yes.
And I think that's an important distinction.
I will accept that important distinction. But
Because I actually think the key here, that what makes this book not a wizards versus lesbians book, is actually its attitude towards colonialism.
indeed, this book is not what you would call empire critical.
No. No, it's not. Or monarchy critical.
That is an excellent point. So it is, yeah, no,
But I still want to hear your thoughts about gender.
yeah. So my thoughts about gender are as follows. So this book is there are two major forms of magic in this book, right?
Yes.
There's and one of them is fire, one of them is water. Fire is west, water is east. Fire is
Earth. Fire is
you know,
earth, and water is stars, is in
yeah.
heaven.
And the fire is the sort of the exemplars of the out of control fire magic are these basically just cartoon villain dragons. But more to the point, like it's the king who gives himself up to the dragons because he is upset that the queen didn't want to fuck him.
Yes, the previous queen.
Yes, the previous queen who he
So
had
they're all
murdered
clones, so.
for spurning his affections. But so I think, and based on the way that it matches up to like a whole bunch of different stereotypical associations with West versus East, active versus passive principles, like the moon stars magic is all about shape shifting and trickery and illusions and dreams, whereas the Western magic is all about like fire
Yes.
and explosions. This is meant to be, and there's meant to be a balance between these two magics. So it's male and female, right? And I'm not saying that these associations reflect reality. I'm saying that these associations are baked into the culture enough that it's pretty clear to me that this is what the book is doing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That there is this sort of hardcore, I guess, sort of. It does seem very sort of Jungian or whatever.
Yeah.
Except like pop Jungian, where they're
Right,
not
exactly.
necessarily.
The thinking is not super deep here, but
No.
the exemplar of the out of control fire magic is a giant, angry monster dragon who wants to conquer the world,
Yes.
who is the worst dad, who talks down to you also, and undercuts your self esteem as he is shooting fire at you, as all the dragons do.
Yes.
And the exemplar of the female magic out of control is the Witch of the Woods. And I'm not entirely, it's not made explicit like what knocked the balance out of whack and caused the big male dragon to arise out of the earth.
It's sort of implied that this kind of just happens, is that these things wax and wane, but unfortunately, like the comet that helps bring things into balance has a slightly erratic orbit, and eventually
right. But
the cosmology here is not as fully developed as one might.
The inference that I got was the thing that knocked the cosmic balance out of order, this book tells us, is that the Witch of the Woods, the worst mom in the history of moms, refused to let her son develop into his own man, and instead.
No, wait a minute. I just realized, which makes the book slightly more interesting, actually. No, because like the worst mom in the world, her thing happens like after the evil dragon is going around, because her son doesn't meet the damsel / the mother until
after
until
the nameless one has risen.
Until they're trying to fight the nameless one.
Right.
No, I think it's the trees. The trees are supposed to be like channeling this stuff, and then the trees keep getting cut down, except for the orange tree.
Right.
The mulberry tree gets cut down, so I can't remember what happens to the hawthorn tree.
Yeah, no, we never really find out what happens to the hawthorn tree, as far as I can tell.
But like,
There's
there's
a
these
lot.
magical trees which are, I think, supposed to be helping keep the balance, and then, you know,
Is it, it could be that because the witch's power originally came from the hawthorn tree, which had the sort of.
well, I think Neporo, her tree gets cut down, and
Right. But we don't know by whom or when that happened,
no,
incidentally.
but we do know that she gets, the tree gives its one gift of immortality to her before the Nameless One arises, because she like lives as an immortal for a while before they go to, she helps seal the Nameless One away.
Indeed. But even if it isn't the witch woman who's largely who's responsible for the horrible dragon coming out, she is sort of the female equivalent to the horrible dragon, and
Right, and so instead of like being this horrible thing that's in your face and has to be sealed away, she just sort of goes into hiding and messes with things.
right. She's the
from the
secret.
shadows.
She's the secret shame that's been manipulating your religion and spreading lies throughout the world. This book feels a little anti-Catholic, also.
It does.
Just a tad, which is very interesting to me. I was like,
which
wait
is
a
very
minute, what the fuck is
interesting.
going on? Yeah.
Which is very interesting because it's not particularly critical of, Christendom.
No, not at all.
It's it feels very Protestant Reformation.
It does, doesn't it? Like,
including like the like weird serious emphasis on the Dutch as like an important country.
Yeah.
Who are also the only power that's trading with Fantasy Japan.
Yeah, no, I noticed.
I've got all sorts of geopolitical, nits to pick when we get to the What Made Us Mad section.
This is like, this is high fantasy with a very broad and sloppy geopolitical brush here.
Yes.
So, but the point that I was trying to make is in terms of what this means to me, in terms of like, this is a different sort of idea than a wizard versus lesbian novel.
Right.
It's not locating the, it's very concerned with having horrible female characters who are horrible in a quote unquote feminine way, and horrible male characters who are horrible in a masculine way, although it's actually much gentler with the male characters as a general matter.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The evil grand vizier, whose name is literally Satan, actually turns out to be a pretty good guy in the end.
Yeah.
Whereas the mistress of the Priory,
but also, there's the whole thing where you think that the spy master is going to be evil, but actually most of the evil, and he does do some pretty awful things, but like the real evil was the mother figure of Sabrin's mother figure.
Everyone's
mother figures are terrible or dead.
Yeah,
there's no good mothers in this book. Oh, except for Loth, our extremely good guy.
Yes, no, his mother is annoying, but like that's how good the mother figures get in this book. His mom is like she's an irritating, fine. Embarrassing mom, but she's fine. And then
I guess
the other moms are
Adeline
religious
or
fanatic murderers.
No, there's also Roos's lover's wife, who is herself a mom and grandmother, and she's nice.
Yes, no, there are a lot of women who are unexpectedly incredibly kind to Roos over the course of this book.
Really, more than he deserves.
Absolutely more than he deserves. I mean,
but you're right. This book is much gentler on its men by and large than its women,
and it is interested in redeeming Roos specifically. Like he is the character who gets who gets like the real redemption arc.
I mean, to be fair, Sabrin gets something of a redemption arc herself, in that she goes from being shallow and annoying to being like an interesting, like a person with an internal life and desires.
Yeah, I mean, she's the Queen of England also. But yeah, no.
Right, but I mean, this book is in some ways, Roos is it's kind of frustrating because he's by far the most interesting character, but he's just not very fun.
No.
There's like there's the
he's a pain in
interesting
the ass.
There's the interesting plot, which is this guy who's kind of terrible and who gets kind of a redemption arc, but ends still being kind of terrible, honestly. Like, he never really comes to grips with all the bad things that he's done.
There are certain things that I enjoyed about his arc. One of which,
there's lots of things I enjoyed about his arc. His arc is, like, again, the most interesting thing in the book. It's just he doesn't actually. It's a superficially redemption arc, but if you actually look at him, he never does any. He doesn't do any of the work for redemption. He doesn't try to. He barely even apologizes for some of the lesser bad things that he does. Yeah. Let alone, cheerful, sort of shrugging and letting this young woman be tortured. And he ends basically the same person, just over his grief somewhat.
And I forgot, in the catalog of awful women in this book, the former suitor of the Eternal Emperor, or whatever his name is, who goes off to become Empress of the Pirates.
But she's great.
She's a lover's spurt. She's great, but she's also like a villain.
Oh yeah, no, she's awful, but she's great. And honestly, part of I think why I like her is that she is a woman in this book who has absolutely no interest in ever being nice to Roose.
Yes. But the book thinks she's a villain.
The book thinks she's a villain, but I mean, come on.
No, she's very cool.
Yeah, it's just like, it's very, one of the things that frustrates me about this book is that there's the plot line that is interesting, but then doesn't actually quite have the courage to stick it through, to make Roose actually face up to what he's done. He just sort of, he has, an epiphany that he needs to get over his dead boyfriend, and then he helps the good guys. But he's still kind of an asshole.
Yes.
And then there's the fun threads of the book, which are, Eid having magic and lesbians and, dragon riding, but they're just not nearly as interesting.
Yeah, no, the fun parts of the book are, but like, again, the book is fun pretty much all the way through. There's always something happening.
It is. It's just, I guess it's mildly frustrating to me that in a book where, you have like lesbian fire mage and, dragon rider lady, the person who gets the most like richly developed interior life is the dude.
Yeah. Dragon rider ladies, the ball was dropped on her pretty hard.
It really was.
She never really got to be a character who was distinct from Eid at all. And Eid was way more developed,
which is unfortunate because she had, I think, in some ways the most potential. She's interesting, but like her she's got this rivalry with the guy, because she's from the gutters and he's of like the long dragon riding lineage, and then that just gets dropped. Yeah. Like, she has all these complicated friendships with people. That all gets dropped.
No, none of her stuff gets paid off. And like her, Roose gets to like grapple with his moral failings, but her way of dealing with her guilt and shame and moral failings is essentially just a dragon telling her that it's okay.
Well, no, to be fair, when she gets hauled up for trial and is like, you're right, this was wrong.
Ta-da.
But that's the thing is that Roose never really admits to himself that, what he's done was like he's done genuinely bad things. And Tane does. And I mean, maybe that makes her a less interesting character in some ways. But it could have been an interesting choice, I think, the way that takes responsibility. But all of her threads get dropped. So
yeah. But the reason that I think that Roose is like the wizard here, is because of his preoccupation with immortality.
He is preoccupied with immortality.
And
The
also,
thing is, he lacks the people skills to be
yeah,
an
no,
effective wizard.
I mean, there are no characters in this book who meet all of the criteria for wizards.
Right.
Because we're really not interested in the action of power in this book at all. This book's politics are rudimentary at best.
This book really does have the politics also of a 90s Breck.
Yeah.
That's sort of like
This is
monarchies are
pre-colonial
great so
theory
long as
kind of stuff, you know.
it is. And
I like how Sabran was like, perhaps later in 100
perhaps in
years,
10 years,
the
perhaps in
people
10
may be ready for self-rule, you know.
Right. I mean, she was like, perhaps in 10 years, I will step down, and you know what?
As
Good
queen.
on her.
And
Right.
let somebody else be monarch, and then
Right.
perhaps in the far distant future we
In a
might
few
dabble with.
generations, we can have
Right.
like a constitutional monarchy or something. Yeah, exactly.
I did like Sabran though. I should mention. I thought that her character was one of the better drawn ones. If I didn't know it better, I would almost think that The Unbroken was written as a sarcastic response to this book. Because the central relationship between Id and Sabran is so, reminiscent, shall we say.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I was not entirely sold on their romance. Like,
it seemed to be mostly physical as far as
it seemed to be mostly
I
physical. And, that I suppose it's also a sort of, if you spent a decade of your life where your primary goal is to get emotionally close to somebody so that you can protect them, you're going to, start developing an emotional attachment. And if you're both if you're both hot and, and you're
hot,
like
youngish,
mid-20s to 30, then that may well result in.
Right. And like Sabran being, extremely traumatized after. But like, but it is like fascinating, like the way that, the book could have made her arranged husband terrible. Like, I think any of our Wizards versus Lesbians books would have.
Right.
But no.
No, he's
a good person. He loves her. She likes him. The sex isn't like mind blowing for her because she's not into dudes, but it's not awful, because he was attentive. And like, this book goes far out of its way to give dudes all the breaks that the other books that we've read for this podcast does not, which is the major thing which makes me think that it doesn't fit. But yes, also the complete lack of any grappling with colonial stuff or power stuff or any of that.
Right. I mean, the thing is, like, there's even the scenes where Tane is just like hanging out with the emperor of kind of fake China, and
yes.
and he's like, it's so much where she's listening to him talk about how hard it is to be emperor, and the narrative presents this, as far as I can tell, totally straight. Like, yes, you're right, it is hard to be emperor.
Heavy lies the head that wears the crown. Yes.
Yes, it's really so tragic. They were right not to let you marry the commoner who you were in love with. She was, there was something wrong with her. That's why she becomes the most terrifying
she
pirate
becomes the
queen of the
terrifying
world.
pirate. Yeah, no, her desire to like usurp the natural order of things, caused her to become a terrifying pirate of the seas.
And like, which is like part of why I'm, it's kind of like, on the one hand, she does lots of awful things. On the other hand, she's one of the few people who seems to genuinely realize that maybe she does not like automatically assume that, hierarchy is, that the current hierarchy is good. And I mean, her response, of course, is to set up her own even more brutal empire of piracy. So she's not like a nice person, but she's one of the few people who, like, even Id is like, I love you and I won't be your subject. But she isn't like,
why don't we fuck off out of here now?
Right, exactly. Or like, maybe nobody should be bowing down to you like this, actually.
Right. Yeah,
And
no,
it's
Sabran never really knocks it off with the "I am your queen" shit.
no, and the thing is that it goes, and again, I can't tell if this is supposed to be deliberate or not. I don't think it is. It goes into such detail about the clothing and the food.
Yeah.
And, and this is presented as, oh, it's ridiculous how, like, 18 fancy dishes are presented to Sabran every morning, and then, she has a slice of bread. But you get glimpses of, everybody in this book is elite of one sort or another. You get glimpses, you see, like, of, Tane's childhood. And there's, poor people are suffering. But this book is way more interested in yummy feasts and beautiful dresses. It sort of acknowledges that people are, and the fact that it then acknowledges that there is, like, class hierarchy and people suffering makes it all the weirder, I think.
Yeah, no, it's sort of a Redwall
dated,
style-y kind of a deal when it's dealing with that kind of stuff. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should follow the Redwall Feast Spot on Twitter. At Redwall Feasts, for example, they put the basket down on the orchard lawn and began setting out a little chunk of pale gold cheese with chives and apples, small farls of soft shrew bread, a few oat muffins, and a flag of green sap milk, and hot rose hip and mint tea, and a mug of cold elder flower and bilberry cordial, and freshly baked lattice, red currant tarts with meadow cream, and a plate of roast chestnuts with cornflower honey, and a foaming goblet of good peach and elderberry brandy with some cornbread and yellow cheese with chestnuts, an ice cold dandelion and mint tea, and a thick slice of flat cake with nuts and berries. At least I think that jingle was supposed to be about food. If it was supposed to be about how racist Redwall is, then it's also that. But yeah, no, it again just feels like 20 years out of date in that way. Mm-hmm. I was just going to add that, the other pirate figure, Sabran's deadbeat dad gets to be this heroic privateer.
Right.
Nobody ever thinks that, well, maybe he should possibly have something to do with the rearing of his child and all of this, but regardless.
To be fair, what's he supposed to do? Be like, yes, the queen cheated on her husband with me, and I'm going to stick around to rule the child, to, like, help rear the child.
He might have been some help in the whole climactic battle to end the world thing. I was expecting at any point for him to come and do something, and he never did.
Right. The main thing that he does is the one time when he expresses any parental anything is when he gets kind of huffy about another arranged marriage for the queen.
Right. And also, is like, no, I don't need it. Just don't tell her, for Christ's sake. I'm enjoying being a privateer. Thanks. But
it is interesting that, like, the good pirate is male and the bad pirate is a woman.
Yes.
Because, like, they're both the discarded lovers of the ruling figures, and one becomes a horrendous pirate queen who, enslaves sentient beings and kills them and sells off their parts. And the other is this sort of jolly figure.
Sexy pirate man. But it is also another thing where it's like, the vast majority of the characters in this book are nobles, even to the extent where it's like, I think the narrator of the audiobook unconsciously gave the poet who gets killed, like Lot's friend, she gives him a Samwise Gamgee voice, even though
he's
makes
also
absolutely
noble.
No fucking sense for a louche effete court poet.
Yes.
But he's the cheerful helper of our gormlessly noble hero, and so that was the voice that he got.
I feel like he was. He was just kind of a waste of time. Like,
he got I don't know what the fuck was up with him.
He didn't really add anything. It's not like Loth needed. He basically got fridged, but
yes, he did. He was the dude who got fridged, I guess.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
there you go.
No, it's like this is the gender politics of this have moved on past the 90s. They're perhaps not caught up with most of the stuff that we're reading these days. It's, the class and geopolitics of this have not.
I lost my train of thought right here, so we segue to some notes. I do have some random notes that I wanted to share.
Share your random notes.
Among the sort of warm, nostalgic, familiar, I'm a teenager reading a gigantic book that I got out of the library feelings that I got from this book include the classic, we're going to end this chapter by having the viewpoint character lose consciousness thing, which happens repeatedly. Just a staple of chapter books.
It's true.
From my childhood.
It's true. And then at some point, people realize that most of the time when you lose consciousness like that causes lingering, traumatic brain injury. And so they stopped doing it as much in fiction.
Nope, we're ignoring that here. People get nearly killed, and then they're back to full fighting strength pretty quickly in this book in that classic style. Speaking of which, like another thing that felt really out of date was actually the sort of the earth and fire dragons. Feels like there was sort of like in that Tolkien, orcs and monsters thing, there was sort of a terror of nature, I think, inherent in that, which is just gone now from the popular consciousness.
Yeah.
Like, we're no longer afraid of the tiger in the woods. We think he's cute. We like looking at pictures of him on Tumblr. And I was like, I don't know. I think dragons are cool, actually. This is...
Right. Well, and I mean, I think that it feels like one of the things that's going on with this book is that, somebody pointed out to the author, isn't it funny how whenever we talk about dragons, we talk, it's always about Western style dragons and not Asian style dragons. And the author was like, what if I did a world where there were both?
Yes.
And then, the Western...
Evil.
And then the Western style dragons, will be... Well, because... the thing is that dragons in the West, because she's drawing on like St. George and the Dragon Slayer and things like that, where dragons are evil, versus, dragons in China were like an imperial symbol.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's just been carried forward unchanged here from popular consciousness. And incidentally, a lot of stuff that's been carried forward here unchallenged from those other brick books from Tolkien up through... I think that I would be shocked if the character of Nick Lazarus here was not informed by Tad Williams's Cadrak the Monk.
I was wondering if you would bring up Cadrak the Monk.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it was hard to miss.
There really is. There really is. Yeah, that. Except except Bruce is gayer.
When I was a lad of 16, I really identified with Cadrak, the monk from Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn trilogy. Enough that I made him my handle all the way through college. And the weird thing about that is that Cadrak is a washed-up failure as a magician. And 16 was too young to have felt like I'd wasted my life, and yet I certainly thought that was my fate. Who knows? Maybe I was right. Maybe I was wrong. Do you enjoy this song? I need to know if all of this was worth it. Oh, that reminds me. That was the other thing that I was upset about Loth's. Speaking of characters that never got anything, I was sad that Loth clearly had a crush on the princess of the Draconic realm, because otherwise we got so close to ace representation in this book, which so rarely happens on this podcast.
Yes, well, because this podcast is about lesbians.
Yeah, but you can be an ace lesbian. That can be
that's
a thing.
True. It is true, but it was clear. But I mean, given how much he kept talking about, he kept thinking to himself about how he can't wait until one day he has this bond, this true love. Like,
He's such a fucking twerp, that guy.
He is a twerp, but
really.
also, like, it would have been really bad ace representation, so let's be glad that it didn't. I suppose you could argue that Loth is demi-representation.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Except that he doesn't really get to know what's her face.
No, he's like Mormon teenager representation. But
Twilight,
yes,
but for men.
I'm like, I was actually... We're complaining a lot about this book in relation to the time that I had reading it.
Right. No, the thing is, it's really entertaining. Well, and see, this is the thing why part of the point of our podcast is we take these books that are doing all of these, usually are doing smart, complicated things, occasionally are not. But when they're not, they, because we have a tool set here. And... Right.
We are tearing into this dumb fun with our hooks and our scalpels. So one more scalpel thing.
All right.
I did appreciate that on Roos's journey, which is the most, as you said, the most interesting and most developed journey that any character gets to have. He goes through like, oh, I've been living for myself. I've been a coward. I've been selfish. I've been drowning myself in booze, but I can live for my granddaughter. Now the granddaughter's another interesting character.
Yes, she is another interesting character.
I was quite sad that she got executed off screen.
Yes, but... it is great though. That is, one of... I did love that moment in the book where he has this epiphany right out loud in front of everybody who has seen his granddaughter's head be, dipped in tar.
And everybody's like...
stuck to the wall, and everyone's like, who wants to be the first to tell him?
I call not it. And yeah, but I really did appreciate that, the sort of the classic angle there would be for him to turn into Batman at that point. And
instead, he just sort of goes back to being a high-functioning alcoholic.
Yeah, no, he just, it's like, oh, well, that was my ladder out. I guess I'll, descend back into my sad sacchery.
Though, he has... one of the interesting things about Roos is that he's... Part of what makes him interesting is that he's like such a sort of... He's really sexist. And the narrative, I can't tell if the narrative realizes it or if the narrative kind of agrees with him. But women get so much more disdain and contempt and anger from him than men do. Which is, it's an interesting choice to make your big gay fantasy, one of your main gay characters be like overtly sexist. But again, we've been talking about all the gender stuff in this narrative, and it's possible that the narrative agrees with him that most women are kind of bitches.
I'm gonna rise to his defense here. Once again, insert jingle about this is not a good look, Isaac. This is not a good look, Isaac. Why do you say these things out loud? Why didn't you edit any of this out? Jeez. I would counter that with, he's an asshole to everyone.
But he's not.
He interacts with women more than he does men, because there are more women characters than male characters in this book. And there are women who he is not an asshole to, including the daughter of his doctor friend, and the woman who saves his life.
Right. See, the thing is, that's why I just said sexist instead of misogynist. Because here's the thing: he is nice to women when they are being kind and sweet to him. When they are in any way an inconvenience to him, he ranges from indifferent to outright hostile, including the wife of his lover, who has had nothing but good feelings for him her entire life, despite the fact that her husband has, put him first.
A living saint, this woman.
Right. Well, and it's like she spends all of her time trying to get his exile rescinded, and, was totally, never seemed to ever, was just like, oh, well, I'm this man's wife, but Nicholas is his true love, and I'm glad he has somebody that he can have that, is his true love. And until he meets up with her and she's like, and she's
the nicest person to him that anybody could ever possibly be,
including, being like, don't worry, I'm going to, reintroduce you to people. I'm even going to, I have a hot astronomer friend I can set you up with. That at that point, he starts being kind to her. But like the other women who he's nice to are the daughter of his doctor friend, who he's not an asshole to his doctor friend. But the daughter, or the woman who saves his life. He seems very, when he is dealing with powerful men, it seems to be okay with that. When he is dealing with powerful women, he treats them with contempt and then is outraged when they act like powerful people do when you treat them with contempt.
I'd say that is not true of his, he pretty much cowers in fear before the Golden Empress, at all times. He doesn't try any of the sarcasm on her.
That is true.
Because he's not an idiot.
Yes.
And he does treat pretty much anybody who he thinks is stupid with like dripping contempt and sarcasm, including the poor idiot boy who washes up on the shore.
That's true. He's pretty. But see, but the thing is that like that guy deserves it.
Yes, he does. What a fucking poltroon. I misused the word poltroon. Yes, he's an idiot, but he's brave.
Right? Yeah, that guy deserves it. And say, like Sousa does not really deserve it, but he is like, well, I guess she's gonna get tortured because even though the poor boy is stupid, I don't know. There's just, I think, as I'm talking to you, I think that it's that there is there's some weird like carryover from the 90s sexism in this book.
Yeah.
And the thing is, because Nicholas is so often the smartest person in the room, or at least always thinks he is, that I think is reflecting that the sexism of the narrative more clearly than, say, Eid, who is willing to make all sorts of excuses for Sobranes.
And I think that like I think that there might be sort of a mirror to that in the weird Protestantism that we're seeing here. Because like as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking more and more like, God, there's some like pretty bedrock sort of, it feels like somebody coming out of that sort of Protestant fantasy / just Protestant value system being like, all right, I understand that things have moved on. We're liberalizing here, but I'm reacting. This is the home idiom here. This is what we're reacting against and updating. The book feels really like it feels like the product of a Protestant view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And is definitely, and it's like, okay, so the divine right of kings might be based on a lie. Thank you for joining us in the 19th century,
right?
Where do we go from here?
Yes, it's just completely unrelated. But you could argue that Tane is ace representation. At no point is she ever really interested in anybody, as far as I can tell.
That is a good point. I expected at the beginning, because I know what podcast we do, that she and her dancer friend were, romantic with each other, but the book is like, she was the best friend anybody could have.
It's really amazing how with Tane and Sousa, and then with Loth and Kit, whatever his name is,
right.
Like
he was a really good friend.
Like it's just like, no homo, guys, no homo, to the point that it almost makes you wonder.
Yeah, this book is very strange. I think is the thing that we're coming to at the end of it. It really does sort of feel like this uncomfortable, these new sort of this veneer of new values sitting uncomfortably on this older rhetoric that underpins the actual plot.
Right. Like, for example, there's this whole, like, actually, Islam, way, the Islamic world, way more advanced. But it's also completely not the set, and yet somehow Europe is the center of all these stories.
Right, exactly. Everything that isn't Christendom is completely decentralized here.
Well, except for, some Japan.
Yeah, but even then, we don't spend any time with the rulers of those nations. We spend, plenty of time with Sabran.
To be fair, that is because she's a love interest. Like, we spend a fair amount of time in fantasy Japan, and we spend a fair amount of time in fantasy Europe. We only spend a tiny bit of time in fantasy the rest of Asia, and a small amount of time in fantasy Islam, but fantasy like Muslim world. But
yeah,
it is always fascinating to me to see worlds that have managed to like completely recreate, the Christian and Islamic world in fantasy and yet have no Jews.
There is that. Well, I mean, given the sort of...
I'm glad. No, honestly, given this book, I'm glad. I'm not. This was not a complaint. I just am noting it's an interesting choice, and I think to some degree it speaks to a certain kind of like contemporary liberal values being pasted onto a 90s book.
Yep. And yeah, as you were saying, given the treatment that that Mary, Mother of God, gets in this book, I'm glad that the Jews don't get a kicking.
Also, like, this book is like completely uninterested in its underclass whatsoever. So maybe there are fantasy Jews. It's just you never see them.
It's just they never arrive on screen. Well, I mean, you know how dragons and their hoarding of wealth tend to get tarred. So maybe that was the reason that these dragons felt so hollow to me, is that they're more problematic.
Like every possible problematic connotation of the dragons has been taken away.
And what do you have left? Just a big dad
when
who
you
breathes
remove
fire.
The racism and anti-Semitism from your monsters, from your European monsters, you're not left. You're just left with bad dad.
Oh my god. I was not expecting us to go so hard on this book. Honestly, I had a good time reading it.
This book is really fun. I cheerfully read all 800 pages of this book twice.
Oh well.
So one other thing that made me mad.
Okay. I'm gonna have to put the "What Made Us Mad" jingle like 15 minutes into the podcast.
Fantasy Europe.
I guess this is the part that made us mad now. Yes?
Very much like you've got some actual European, things going on here. Fantasy Japan, she apparently, according to the author's notes at the end, read the Nihongi and the Kojiki in translation. And then there's Fantasy the rest of Asia. All rolled into one.
I didn't even think that Fantasy Japan was, like, specific enough to count as Fantasy Japan.
I mean, I don't know. It's an archipelago. I don't know. Like, it's an archipelago that only trades with the Dutch and has, like, that's at least some connection to, and everybody has, like, names that mostly work with Japanese phonemes, I think. Don't quote me on that, though. I didn't read that carefully.
Not really.
The thing is, they're not Japanese names, but they're mostly things you could write in katakana.
Yeah, but they didn't she didn't use, I mean...
No, she didn't.
If you're going to do, it's the Tokugawa shogunate and we're doing the Dutch trade, then, maybe some societal stratification that it's more anyway.
Well, I mean, you have your samurai class. It's just that unlike actual Japan, where that was a straight up caste system, you can apparently
you can apply.
You can apply and
right.
It was really funny because the first couple chapters of Tade's arc are very much like Harry Potter-esque, or magical, like YA. Oh, here's the people who are my friends, and here's the mean bully, and I'm gonna show them all.
Once again, just a little bit cherry picked and stapled onto another book. This book really feels like a greatest hits of the sort of fantasy blockbusters of the last 60 years.
Yeah, it does.
Except with lesbians.
Except with lesbians. I read a couple. There were a couple of old fantasy hits back in the day that had some lesbians, but usually not so much the big blockbusters. But still, like, the thing is that the fantasy Japan is at least drawing on somebody read the Kojiki and the Nihongi and the Wikipedia entry for, the Tokugawa period. The fantasy Asia...
The fantasy rest of Asia is
pure pastiche. I mean, I think it's kind of supposed to be China, except it's really not.
It's more Polynesian almost, honestly.
I mean, it's got it has the giant Chinese treasure ships, which I promised Lyra I would mention this. Somebody did raise the complaint of the book that the dragon should not have been able to fit inside the boat. But just for the record, this is clearly a complaint raised by somebody who doesn't know how large the Ming treasure ships were. Because those things could hold like 500, 600 people. They could definitely hold a riding dragon.
I'm with you there.
So like
that was not one of the problems that I had with this book.
No, me neither, because I'm firmly of the belief that the dragon is the size that makes the metaphor work in fantasy books.
Yes, of course.
That is the important thing. But some people apparently are very nitpicky about things like dragon size. So
indeed.
So I'd just like to note that actually that not a valid complaint. The Ming had some very large boats.
Yep. Let's see. I have a few very minor complaints as long as we're wrapping up. This book also engages in bird libel. Doesn't have very good bird representation.
And it has that one very good bird though.
Yeah, but even that bird is the sort of the agent of the Priory and ends up
and is also
eat over.
Right. Well, and is very much like a Mary Sue kind of bird. She's the last of her kind, and she's been tamed for the
and also it's another one where it's like, oh, the noble eagle's pea-brained scavenger, birds of prey.
So you didn't like
versus the conniving bribable parrot.
But see, I love the conniving
sentient.
See, I loved the conniving bribable parrot who was roughly intelligent, was intelligent enough to bribe people, and like, I don't know. I was sort of expecting you to enjoy the fact that there's a parrot who seems to mostly exist to extort treats out of women so that they can have their love affairs.
It's just, it just doesn't strike me as particularly parody behavior.
That's
to be
fair.
honest.
That's fair. Parrots are way too dedicated to mayhem to take bribes.
Yeah. And I, if you're going to introduce the fact, like, parrots with human intelligence and then call them mimics and then just not do anything with that,
that is true. There was a lot of very intelligent animals, and they, with the exception of the talking dragons, they didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, or those are, speaking of greatest hits, we had our armored bears in the form of the giant, there's
the giant
things.
There's the giant weasel. Yeah, no, there's the giant weasel. I forgot about the giant talking weasel. He's nice, I guess. Yeah,
no. So it's just like, eat it with a spoon. It's cereal. Mm-hmm. It's breakfast cereal. But
you're right. You're right. Bad bird representation.
And while this book was well written for the most part, there was one line that when Loth and Kip were going through were escaping from the Draconic Kingdom, the line, "They walked for hours, sometimes turning a corner, but otherwise moving in a straight line," was in this book. And I had to stop and write that one down. Anyway, I can't believe that she named the Spy Master Lord Satan. Anyway, all right. But I think, do we have anything else that we want? We've gone for over an hour now.
Yeah, and seriously, like we've really torn into this book, but it's fun. It's a fun popcorn book. If you got nothing better to do on a Saturday, read this.
Yeah, if you're itching for that, it's like, I mean,
Or just if you have a lot of hours to kill. This is 800 pages, and it's
there's a lot of
entertaining.
I mean, sure, there's some unreconstructed 90s like tropes in here, but it's better than those books are for the most part, like it politically and, in terms of just
honestly,
pacing and execution. And
this brings back the feeling of reading one of those books, which is great because you can't go back and reread those books now because, like, we are older and wiser and have better taste.
Right.
And so you go back and read them. I at least do. And I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I don't know how I was ever able to get into this. And this manages to recapture that feeling while being competent enough that you can actually just get sucked in.
100%. All right. So I think that wraps it up.
That wraps it up. Next,
what are we doing next time?
Provenance.
I've forgotten.
We're doing Provenance.
Hooray.
Speaking of bad moms.
Yes. I will go ahead and say that I'm glad that we're able to do an Anlecki book because the ancillary books do not meet our criteria. I mean, they kind of do.
They kind of do because, because everybody uses she, so you could kind of argue that everyone in that book who has a romantic
You're telling me a spaceship
relationship
can't be a lesbian.
Perhaps we may well do them at some point, if not as a regular episode, then as a special episode if we can talk Lee into being our guest.
Indeed. But for now
we're doing Provenance, which is so much shorter than Priory.
It's just a lovely little mouthful. It'll make for an easy episode, an easy read.
Yep.
So we will see you then, I suppose.
Yep. Bye.
Bye-bye.